Hi, everyone. My name's Amy Rose, Managing Director at the Digital Economy Council of Australia. You're joining us today on the Global Regulatory Digital Asset Summit. Today, we're taking a journey around the world to understand what various jurisdictions are doing with respect to digital asset regulation. We have just covered a little bit of the US. We are back to back today. So if you're in the lobby, please jump into the sessions or book yourself into the sessions that you're most interested in, or just flow throughout the day and jump in. If you're joining us now, we've just left the US conversation, which will really be an opportunity for us to compare and contrast, particularly with this New Zealand conversation. We're about to be joined on stage by Bryan Ventura, Muir and Paul Quickenden. So these gentlemen will be, look, they're in the grassroots in New Zealand. So there's no one better to discuss what's happening on the ground there. Bryan will be moderating the session. Look, he's a seasoned lawyer at Hamilton Locke. He has extensive expertise, actually across the APAC region, to be honest, in corporate law, capital markets, and commercial law. So I'm going to bring them to the stage and we will let them get their show on the road and do their introductions and share a little bit about what's happening on the ground in New Zealand. Here we go.
Hi, good morning all. Good afternoon. Introducing myself, I'm Bryan Ventura. I'm a partner at Hamilton Locke, New Zealand, specializing in fintech and Web3, as well as traditional financial services. You were joined here by Jeremy Muir and Paul Quickenden, who will be introducing themselves. You've joined the New Zealand Digital Asset Regulation Fireside Chat. And over to you, Paul and Jeremy.
Thanks, Bryan.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. So I'm Paul Quickenden. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Easy Crypto, and we are one of the larger crypto trading businesses in New Zealand. Over to you, Jeremy.
Great. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks, Paul. So I'm here with two hats on. I'm a partner at Minter Ellison Rudd Watts in New Zealand. I co-lead the National Banking and Financial Services practice, and I specialize in, amongst other things, fintech, crypto, financial services. My other hat today is as the chair of the current exec of Blockchain NZ, the industry body equivalent for the Digital Economy Council of Australia. And happy to be joined also by two other members of the exec, and Paul and Bryan.
Great. Well, we're happy to share about what's happening in New Zealand digital asset regulation. And maybe I'll start off with Jeremy, and then if you're happy, Paul, to jump in. Just exactly at a high level, how do you see the current regulatory environment in New Zealand in terms of digital assets, and also what are the key challenges facing the industry?
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. So look, in New Zealand, we have some wonderful features of our legal and regulatory system for the digital asset space. And then, like most places, we have a few challenges. So the current environment is very much based on our standing laws. We have very, very little specific digital asset law or regulation. Just a couple of points around tax and anti-money laundering legislation have been passed. But using our current laws, what we do know is that we have a set of very clear financial product definitions. So it's usually very easy for us to draw a line and say whether something will be treated as a regulated financial product or whether it won't. And we also have a very limited set of licenses and other forms of regulation, some of which will apply to crypto-related businesses, but usually at a pretty low level, which is another point. AML laws do apply to pretty much any aspect of a business related to digital assets. From a regulator's level, we're lucky in that we have a very good set of working relationships with the main financial regulator, the Financial Markets Authority, or FMA. Other peripheral regulators or other regulators that are involved are the Reserve Bank, particularly in relation to digital currencies and other aspects like that. and the Department of Internal Affairs, which is the supervisor for AML for many crypto businesses. They also come together under what's called the Council of Financial Regulators, or COFA, which has a fintech brand or sort of portal where people can access the opportunity to meet with a group of people from the various regulators that may be involved in whatever your crypto product is. So it's quite straightforward in New Zealand to get in front of the regulators, although generally it's good to go not asking questions but suggesting answers in terms of how you think your product should be treated. So we have good ways of actually helping things work through. In terms of what's happening next, we also have a select committee, finance and expenditure select committee inquiry into cryptocurrencies a couple of years ago. So myself and Dr. Alex Sims, an academic, wrote a report with some recommendations for future regulation. Those have been looked at by the new government that we have now, but are kind of sitting quietly waiting for a home. So I think what we're waiting for and pushing for is for current government to play a bit of catch up with Australia and other jurisdictions. Sorry, that was a reasonable spiel, but I think it's all good background. Paul, you're at the sort of cutting edge of some of those things. How would you describe it?
I think our regulators are kind of takers. Like we do tend to follow rather than lead. That's a characteristic that I think is noticeable. The other thing that's observable compared to other jurisdictions is just how approachable they are. Like it is not hard to get in front of the regulators and discuss your plans and initiatives and see where you may have to make some changes or make some considerations. So I think that those two characteristics really stand out about our regulation compared to Australia and the US in particular.
Yeah, and to add to that, to those great points from Paul and Jeremy, the Financial Markets Authority has a designated person who is the fintech lead. I won't name this person for their benefit. However, they tend to run as the point person for managing and coordinating the Council of Financial Regulators when a fintech or a Web3 company wants to engage with the council. And then I guess just from observation and practice, I haven't necessarily seen any kind of regulation by enforcement from the New Zealand regulators, and I think it tends to suggest a fairly lukewarm attitude towards the industry at this stage.
So just on that, Bryan, I think what we have seen is that where we have taken products to the FMA for sort of pre-review is that they've been interested. But where things do not require a license or some other form of prescribed disclosure, the form of regulation that they're left with is really only what we call fair dealing. So if a product is misleading or deceptive or makes unsubstantiated representations, those are the kind of powers that the regulator will lean into on crypto products. But we certainly haven't seen them take any actual court actions. There are no equivalents to some of the actions taken in Australia. The only judicial decision really we have around crypto is a helpful one in a sense, in that it established early on that crypto was a form of property, so that makes the position in New Zealand relatively clear as well.
And I think those protections that you just talked about, those acts actually act as good protections for our retail base, and so the Fair Trading Act is in apply. It definitely applies, and then once you're registered, then you must have a disputes regime as well, and so there are those kind of mechanisms that are coming from the traditional finance into our sector.
Yeah, and as a closing, yeah, that's right. As a closing remark as well, I think Jeremy's point about our current laws being quite clear, I think it's quite good that we have pretty clear legal tests to apply to crypto assets, for example, and I think that's helped some of the innovation here in New Zealand. Or maybe if I start with you on the next question, how does New Zealand's approach to digital asset regulation compare to other countries in the APAC region, such as Australia? I mean, I know Easy Crypto's, got businesses all over the world, so maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah, So right now, I think it's fair to say that the regulatory community is focused on other areas besides, the digital asset space. And so while they're approachable and willing to understand and give, really constructive input on any initiative, I don't see them being as advanced in terms of their thinking around licensing and that sort of stuff as other jurisdictions, and are a little bit behind Australia. Having said that, though, one of the characteristics that does stand out is that it's less bureaucratic and less penal. So we aren't seeing, regulation by enforcement actions at this stage, and the small market certainly helps. Like I know of cases, I'm sure you two do, is where people have potentially got quite onto thin ice, and words have been spoken, and then retail investors have been protected and that sort of stuff. So I think those two characteristics really do stand out from our market. What about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that's right. So we're in what I often characterize as an environment of benign neglect by the regulators and authorities, in that they're not hurrying to make changes, and they're positively interested in some of the developments in this space, very much have a consumer protection focus and hat on, but they're not really looking to make changes for the sake of it. Having said that, there is work being done as we see the rest of the world evolve more into licensing regimes, etc., to perhaps bring New Zealand into that, which would also potentially be useful for a lot of businesses, where they may, if they can have the status of a license, then they may find it easier to maintain banking relationships and otherwise look after their customers. So I was in Wellington with Blockchain NZ and also a global crypto exchange, running a session this week for parliamentarians, educating them on crypto and blockchain, and talking about sort of the ways forward that we might move the dial. And the government is looking to make changes where it is helpful to industry rather than hindering them.
And closing remark there, I think that's right. I think regulation, specific crypto regulation, will help legitimize the industry. It'll help grow the tax base, the employment base. It'll help crypto digital asset businesses get insurance coverage or cheaper insurance coverage, raise more capital. So while regulation in a vacuum may not seem good, it does seem like regulation makes sense in this industry. Over to you, Jeremy. The next question is, what are the biggest compliance challenges that digital asset companies face in New Zealand, and how can they best navigate those?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So having laid out that there's a low threshold for a lot of regulation in this space in New Zealand, there are some things which are difficult. So our anti-money laundering laws, which we helpfully call anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism rather than countering terrorism financing, so AML-CFT in New Zealand, is set at a reasonably high threshold. We were late to the party. FATF told us that we needed stronger laws, which we have embraced. So now our AML laws are amongst the strongest and set the thresholds reasonably high. So crypto businesses, that is a challenge, and maybe I'm sure Paul can comment on that. And then the other thing, as mentioned, is not so much a regulatory issue, although it can be said to derive in part from the AML and risk thresholds, is again just the simple act of getting transactional banking accounts from our banks. Having said that, there is also another select committee inquiry into the banking sector and banking relationships, where the industry has been asked to submit any difficulties they're having so that the government can hopefully assist. Paul.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with everything you just said. So the key difference I notice is that the bar for AML CFT is really high in New Zealand, and the requirements quite strenuous. And we know of some exchanges that have tried to come in and realise just how onerous that is. And then consistent themes around banking or debanking, which the inverse of. So there's those two challenges exist for the digital asset ecosystem in its entirety, I think is fair to say. And then the other thing that leaning a little bit into the future, but there is a little bit of concern about what we're witnessing in the UK market, where banks have been made, basically liable for all fraud, regardless of, how many times they've told a customer that they're in trouble, and the fallout from that was for the banks to shut down access to all forms of risky, quote unquote risky activity, and that would certainly hobble most industry initiatives and innovation. So it becomes a bit of a poison chalice, I guess. So those things are something that we're looking out for. We also think that, given that we are a follower in regulation, that two things will be coming our way. So custodial regulation, which could be a little bit ironic in my opinion, because the traditional finance regulation of custody in New Zealand is loose. I think that's the polite term. And then self-hosted wallets. I think the Europeans are certainly leading the charge on that, and right now they're carved out. And we have the travel rule in force in New Zealand, and there's a carve out for self-hosted wallets, but I can see a day where that certainly will change.
Yep, those are great points. And just a closing remark that, from my experience working with overseas investment platforms, DCEs, which have a strong partnership type of relationship with government agencies, with banks, the irony is actually DCEs play a frontline compliance partnership role in preventing scams, preventing the movement of illicit funds. And so I think once the New Zealand industry, the New Zealand government, and the New Zealand banking system starts to really grasp this, they'll maybe we'll see a paradigm shift. Next question for Jeremy. How important do you think is international collaboration in shaping New Zealand's digital asset regulations, and what partnerships or alliances are currently in place?
Yeah, great. Well, we are looking very broadly to try and identify the best in breed sort of ideas for regulation that we can pitch to the government here. We do have the opportunity to do so because we're moving from a pretty flexible base. So we're very keen to have discussions, to attend events like this, to talk to people, travel, listen, learn. So Blockchain NZ, which is part of the NZ Tech group of organisations, so that covers also separate organisations like FinTech NZ, RegTech, and AI Forum organisations, has signed a memorandum of understanding with DECA, the Digital Economy Council of Australia. And under that memorandum, we're to encourage exchange of information for people from our industry to attend industry events in Australia. And we very much extend the invitation for people in Australia to look out for what we're doing. Come and visit us. It's very easy for us to get a series of meetings or coffees or beers, meals lined up for someone if you want to come down to New Zealand. And I think with that we can learn from others as well.
Do you have any thoughts, Paul,
Well,
about international collaboration?
Yeah, look, I think like all businesses, like, it is a very interconnected industry from our point of view, and it's internet money. When I think of digital assets, I'm talking about crypto. So it's internet money, and so we are highly reliant on the global ecosystem and machinations around that stuff. So I think that's true. I also would say that New Zealand is a exporting nation. Like, we form free trade agreements all of the time, and all of those agreements are in play over the top of whatever we do in the sector as well. So, we Easy Crypto and we, Blockchain New Zealand are keen to keep fostering those international relationships and volumes and pathways and all of that sort of stuff. And we're really open to working with as many players as we can.
Just to add to that, I think New Zealand is a small country, even smaller than Australia in terms of a number of people and therefore a market. But so we are definitely looking at this industry as a weightless export in many ways. So some of the very successful companies in New Zealand in this space have been those that have focused on growing target markets outside of New Zealand, and not necessarily in the financial trading investment speculation end of the market, but as in the creative industry. So companies like Futureverse and VV here have really grown markets overseas. So we're very committed to an expansionary and global focus for this industry.
Yeah, those are good points. And closing remark as well is the industry here is surprisingly very focused on content and digitizing content and selling digital goods like VV and Futureverse. And so, Paul, last question. What measures are being implemented to protect consumers in the digital asset space? And how can these measures be improved?
So again, back to Jeremy's opening points, largely we've applied a traditional finance overlay to the digital asset space. There's clear carve-outs for what is not a financial product and what isn't, but you still have some overriding legislation. So Fair Trading Act, I think there's another variation, Jeremy, you can talk about that, but the Fair Trading Act is something that's been in New Zealand for a very long time, and it's basically a do no harm clause, operate with integrity in the market. And then, like I said, once you become registered on the Financial Service Provider Register, the FSPR, one of the requirements there is that you have a dispute resolution service, and there's a few in the market. And so those kind of protections exist. And then, Jeremy, is there anything else that I've missed?
Yeah, so the point you were making around the Fair Trading Act and those sort of, don't do harm type of rules, there are equivalent rules that are basically identical under the Financial Markets Conduct Act, which is, as I was saying, fair dealing, don't be misleading, deceptive. So those rules apply under both of those pieces of legislation, with the difference being the regulator. So one is regulated by the Financial Markets Authority, one is regulated by the Commerce Commission, and depending on the nature of your asset and whether it's regarded as a financial asset or a financial service, which much crypto will be, either the FMA or the Commerce Commission can take an interest in ensuring that consumers are looked after. We also have recommended, so in the report that Alex and I wrote for the Parliament, we did recommend things like bringing some aspects of crypto investment and trading into the financial advice regime or the client money, client property regime, at the very least, even if you didn't go as far as licensing exchanges and businesses. Although, again, seeing the way the world's moving, I think there will be more pressure for that to happen as well. But in the meantime, generally the approach that we take with businesses that are trying to develop yield-earning products or to offer coins and tokens in New Zealand is to work out the legal regime and then sort of front run it to the regulators and explain to them that even though it may be outside some of the more onerous parts of the regulation, here's what we intend to do to look after consumers, whether that's through information, warning statements, or really just being very clear as to what the nature of the product is.
Yeah. And a closing remark, we do have consumer protection laws like unfair contract terms regimes, the Consumer Guarantees Act, which are technology agnostic, and they apply to investment platforms which are selling or facilitating trading of digital assets already. I'm not sure how much time we have, if we have room for questions from the audience.
Thanks, Bryan. You actually do have a little bit of time for Q&A if some of the audience want to send through some questions. We have a break coming up before the next session at 11 a.m. So absolutely, if there's any questions from the audience that they want to send through, please feel free. I do want to point out there's a lobby, and in the lobby, and this is something that we've just found out, there's about 268 people sitting there watching the live stream there. So if you want to, I think there might be a bit of confusion around how to join the sessions. I know you're watching there, but you just hit join and you can come in. Some people might be a bit nervous about that, but yeah, Q&A, definitely.
Someone's putting a hand up or waving.
Yeah, always. Well, Jeremy, you touched on that MOU. If there aren't any questions, I can't see them at the moment. Really excited that you brought that up. I didn't know if I was allowed to. So the relationship that we're building out, we will be very engaged. The first event I'm looking forward to is the Digital Economy Conference that you're coming over for in June next year. And I'm really looking forward to heading over to Japan and I'm sorry, to New Zealand and having a conversation with those people who you said you could set meetings up with. So that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a small but perfectly formed community. So we're definitely happy to help people get the lie of the land or to understand the way the system works over here.
Yeah, Jeremy, one of the questions I have for you, I guess, a very future focused. What do you see happening in the next 18 months over here in Australia? You know, we're waiting for some legislation just to build those guardrails for our businesses to innovate. What do you see happening on the ground in NZ?
Well, I think that we're going to see some interesting businesses coming through under the current rules, because I know that I'm working on some people developing some interesting sort of tokenization of assets and other sort of interesting uses of the technology. I'm sure Bryan is the same, Easy Crypto and Paul definitely doing some interesting things. So I think we'll see that. In terms of regulation, there is an interesting moment here because the government has signaled that they are looking for easy wins where the industry can come to them and say, yeah, here's what you could do to make our lives better. And for the crypto industry, one of those things could actually be more regulation in certain areas or the right regulation. What we don't have is a sort of a powerful current of people trying to regulate for the sake of regulation or because of a perceived harm. So in some ways, that's quite a sweet spot to be in, but it does put the onus back on the industry to do some creative thinking about how we can actually do it. And, you know, the regulator here, the Financial Markets Authority, is not looking for extra jobs, and if they did, they would want perhaps more money to regulate them. So I think I don't expect big change, but if we can come up with some interesting things, and there have been talk around some fintech sandbox type of ideas that might extend to Web3 and crypto products as well, maybe some licensing around the edges for certain types of businesses, then I think that will be a positive step forward.
Oh, absolutely. So sorry.
Oh, sorry. We've got a couple of anonymous questions.
Oh, nice.
I can see
I'll
it
hand
on
it back over to you.
Sorry, Amy Rose, did you want to ask that question before we we've got 3 questions now.
Oh, look, honestly, I'm going to hand it back over to you. And thanks, Jeremy. Looking forward to heading to your place soon.
Great. We've got a question here, anonymous. What will be the key regulation changes in crypto in New Zealand since 2023?
For me, it
There
was
is
an
an obvious
introduction.
one.
Yeah, for me, it's the introduction of the travel rule that came in. So again, the AML bar is quite high, and so that came from the Department of Internal Affairs, and so that went live 1 July, I think, this year.
June, I think.
Yeah, sorry, 1 June. Thank you. So that's you know, we're not the only jurisdiction doing that, but it's a clear and obvious different deviation from the Australian market. And annoyingly, in my opinion, you know, New Zealand's got its own particular flavour of it with a slightly different interpretation, and so that makes solving for it a little challenging.
Yeah, I mean, there's really been leap in, Bryan, if you can think of something, but there's really been no other change since 2023. or no perceptible hardening of attitudes or softening with the regulators. It's been very much business as usual. We've certainly taken things to them. We've been engaged in some ongoing conversations over certain products and things, but it's been very much business as usual. Bryan, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, just from my practice, I've noticed the definition of virtual asset and the AML legislation has become broader than I think what the FATF guidance has suggested, and I think that has some downstream implications for the industry. There's a question here, another question, whether are sanctions applicable in the space? The short answer is yes, but happy to send this to the group.
Oh, 100%. Yep.
Yep. So in New Zealand,
Depends what you mean by sanctions. If it's sort of international sanctions around trading with certain other countries and jurisdictions, yes, although we take a slightly different approach than, say, Australia does, and have a slightly different approach to US sanctions, I believe, although it's not my specialist subject. If you mean just penalties for getting things wrong or being misleading or causing problems for people, then that's obviously an issue as well.
Yep. In New Zealand, there's the United Nations Sanctions Act, which applies to a universe of countries which are on the sanctions lists and individuals. And then there's the recent Russian Sanctions Act, which applies to Russian individuals and entities. There's a question here about, please elaborate more about real-world assets tokenization. I think that was something Jeremy was talking about.
Yeah, and I know I've got at least one project which is looking at tokenizing a particular type of assets for potentially a retail ultimately client base, but it's still kind of in stealth mode, so I can't really talk more about that. We've certainly seen tokenization of art and things through NFTs, including non-digital art. And some of the linkages between sort of e-commerce of real assets and other assets. But, in terms of actual sort of financial assets and bond issues and things, we're still kind of a work in progress. Hey, Bryan, I think you might have looked at this for some people as well.
Yeah, similar to Jeremy, I'm working with one client that's launching a real-world asset tokenization platform. And that involves speaking to the regulators, making sure they're comfortable, and it'll be exciting to have tokenized real-world assets, tokenized financial products in New Zealand and across APAC soon.
So I'm not representing anyone, so I can make it plainer. Like, people are looking to tokenize and fractionalize horses. People are looking to tokenize and fractionalize gold, government bonds. That sort of thing, with a view to, again, copying kind of what BlackRock did with, I forget the name of the fund, Buddle or something, where they're taking US treasuries and making them widely available, and applying some of the goodness that blockchains have in terms of 24/7 and and instant settlement and all that sort of stuff. So that's the type of thing that we're talking about with real world assets. People in New Zealand have been fractionalizing real estate for several years now, that I'm aware of at least 2 or 3 projects doing that. So it's not terribly new, but getting into government bonds and that sort of deep, financial product, I think that's a new space and is leading to conversations around sandboxes and all sorts of things.
That's worth, so Easy Crypto has a New Zealand dollar stablecoin as well, of course, which is constructed really as a form of tokenization of a bank deposit, effectively, in the sense that it's fully backed by assets held in a bank account, held on trust for the token holders, rather than a more sort of treasury issuance type model. So that's another example of creating something in a way that sort of worked within our regulatory framework and tax frameworks and AML frameworks, by using a relationship to another asset.
And there's a question here maybe Paul would be best to answer this. How are you going with the travel rule implementation?
Steadily, I think is the answer. Again, the requirements come in fairly recently. The industry information, I think it was fair to say, was a little bit late in getting all of the requirements from the regulator, and they've been accommodating because of that. But we're all working towards that, using various different means and solutions. And I'm aware of, the handful of organisations that are subject to it are working towards it reasonably well, Gary. So, but work in progress, yes.
And then there's a question here from Alejandro. Are you aware of the model law for digital assets and exchanges proposed to the UN IGF-BAS? I think there are commas in between there. The purpose is to set the basis for a government and customize it according to its reality.
Yeah, I mean, I am aware of that, and various international bodies have set various standards. The thing to realize for New Zealand is that we're kind of a bit the way that we regulate and that we license a lot of other activities in the TradFi sector is not necessarily the same as it is in, say, Australia, where you have the sort of all-encompassing AFSL type regime. We really only have licenses for a certain subset of activities provided to retail customers, largely in New Zealand. So managing a fund, issuing derivatives, being a licensed insurer, being a registered bank or a licensed non-bank deposit taker. So there are quite a number of activities that are not licensed. And Paul alluded to one earlier, which was providing a custody service for securities, does not require a license in New Zealand, somewhat unbelievably. So for us to sort of pick up a licensing regime and then adapt it to New Zealand, I think will take a little bit of work, because we just don't currently have. We've really just got these bespoke regimes, but I think we'll give it a go.
Yeah, that's right. And there are risks as well. I mean, licensing custody may sound simple and may sound rational, but there's a risk that we may end up like other jurisdictions where the licensing regime caused significant year-long bottlenecks, which also isn't good for the industry. There's a question here for the floor. Events like FTX collapse are impacting the interests of investors, ? How do you overcome those?
Yeah. Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, so like the rest of the world, that event deflated trust in the entire ecosystem, and we've spent the last couple of years recovering from that. I think the key. So I've got a family member who works in banking who, ironically, is not particularly fond of crypto, but as soon as it happened, it was fascinating. As soon as it happened, he said, "Fraud is fraud. That is a criminal activity, and it shouldn't have happened, but it did." And so I don't know if it's a specific to crypto example that it did deflate the industry. No doubting that, and probably led to what we called the last crypto winter. But trust is coming back. I think having the largest asset managers in the world like BlackRock and Fidelity now, launching ETFs has certainly proven that it's an asset class with a lot of staying power. The success of those ETFs, and they've been wildly successful, has proven the interest is still there in the market. So I'm not familiar with how the Australian ETFs are tracking. I know they've been in market now for a good couple of months, I think. So that certainly has helped. The maturation of the regulations globally, what we're seeing at the FCA in the UK and MICA in Europe, while they're not perfect regimes, are certainly helping investor confidence as well. So I don't think it's all happening in a vacuum.
Yeah, we've had a couple of exchanges in New Zealand that have gone into liquidation or been wound up. At least one as a result of a hack. One still sort of being worked out as to what exactly went on, but they affected relatively few New Zealand customers in relatively small amounts. A lot of the New Zealand customers have predominantly used larger players like Easy Crypto and perhaps one or two of the larger global exchanges. So it's not clear that reputationally the community has felt too damaged by a lot of those events. I think what it has meant is that there's definitely space in the New Zealand market for probably some more players to emerge and hopefully sort of grow the level of interest overall.
Yep.
And as a closing remark to that, I think it does show the importance of having some kind of either custody industry standards or, you know, a well-designed custody regulation framework for digital asset service providers in light of those collapses. Well, team, we don't have any more questions. Maybe I'll leave it to the floor, maybe to Amy Rose. Is that the plan?
Yes, that's a plan. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It has been a pleasure. I actually had other questions, but I don't think we have time now on debanking, which was going to be a nice, juicy one for you. But we'll have a conversation about that in the future, I think, Jeremy, as we get our relationship underway.
Those conversations.
Yeah, we should probably do like a separate sort of webinar maybe to chat about what we're seeing and do some comparing and contrasting. So thank you so much, gentlemen. It's just a pleasure to see you. Looking forward to heading over and having dinner with you all very shortly.
Thanks for having us. And thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
So for everyone who is watching in the lobby, that's absolutely fine to continue doing that. I have had feedback that it's probably the easiest way to do it because there's no jumping from room to room. So thank you for all to everyone in attendance who are watching. We're going to take a short break for about 15 minutes and then we're going to jump into a global conversation and then move into a conversation with Japan and Singapore and Vietnam and a few other regions. So we'll see you very shortly. Thank you.
See you all.
Bye.